There we go. Okay, brain is waking up. So we are going to be hanging out with solution. Can you all see this okay? Full screen? We're working? Okay, wonderful. So solution is stage 2 in Ripley's 12 stages. And solution is also stage 2 in the 7-step process, for those of you who have done that. So we calcine first. We light things on fire and reduce them to ash. There are actually grades of ash. We'll talk about this next week. And reducing things to ash and doing it with precision and paying attention to the quality and color and texture of the ash is significant, particularly for the second stage, which is solution, where you drop your ash into a solution and allow it to dissolve. And more broadly, you place your materials into a fluid that is not a hot fluid. So vitriol, because it burns to the touch, would be considered a hot fluid and would be put into the category of calcination. Solution is dropping things into fluids that are cooling and actually dissolve just by virtue of um, viscosity of liquid. And water is one of the greatest dissolving agents on Earth. So we're going to spend our time today thinking about flow states, fluidity, fluids, how to think in a more non-binary or non-dualistic way. We'll spend our time also looking at trance states and dream states and their role in the alchemical imagination. So there's lots of ground to cover here. Last time we worked with Saturn, and just as a recap and a refresher, I find that repetition is quite useful in alchemy. There is a system of thought in Western alchemy that when the one mind starts to spit the idea of you towards the one thing, and you begin to drop down towards earth to take a body, you go through the 7 celestial spheres, and each one gives you a gift that will help you navigate this terrain and navigate being in a state of separation or apparent separation. So last time we dealt with Jupiter, or sorry, Saturn, who is the Lord of time, right? Saturn helps us deal with temporal reality, the fact that we will all decay and die, the fact that we flower, bloom, and then fall back to Earth is the gift of Saturn. Saturn helped us think about tyrannical structures, rigidity, primarily within ourselves to start, but then, of course, we look outward and see rigidity and tyranny externally. And Saturn asks us to think about rigidity and inflexibility and to confront it by using time, which can be reduced to giving us tools to become really present so that we don't become fixed and locked, which tends to happen more if we're looking backwards or forwards instead of right here. Once we've fallen through the sphere of Saturn, the heavenly sphere, we go down into the sphere of Jupiter, and this is where we're going to be today. So we'll talk about the qualities of Jupiter, which might sound almost opposite to Saturn. My brain is slowly waking up. It's 8 a.m. here on the West Coast. Okay, so Jupiter in the night sky is enormous. You can fit 13 Earths inside of Jupiter. It's big, it's silver, it's bombastic, it takes up a lot of space. And these planets, in terms of the heavenly spheres, are listed in order of their quickness or slowness in speed across our sky. Saturn being the slowest, Jupiter being the second slowest, which in ancient astrology was associated with grandiosity, and a march of time that moves slowly, almost like a royal body moving down the aisle to take their throne. So Saturn, known as Kronos in the Greek, was the deity who did not want his children to overthrow him and take over as leader of the gods, and so was swallowing them. And Saturn's wife was deeply distressed by this, as you could imagine, and so gave Saturn Kronos a boulder to swallow in place of one of her children, Zeus, also known as Jupiter in the Roman lexicon. And so Zeus was hidden away and grew up into adulthood. And when he did so, he compelled Saturn Kronos to vomit up all of his siblings. And then he killed Saturn Kronos and took over as the leader of the new gods with all of the siblings. So Zeus Jupiter is associated with revolution, with things expanding, with things becoming new. The planet Jupiter, as it happens, has the most lightning on it of any planet in our solar system. And this could speak to you about the incredible power of the ancient mind to travel to other worlds without the physical body. Because in ancient times, before we could see this with our cameras, in fact, we didn't know that Jupiter had this much lightning until the 1970s. The ancients associated the planet Jupiter with lightning deities. In our case, this would be Zeus or Jupiter, the lightning deity. So Jupiter, the planet, is bright, it's silver, it's associated with the lightning deity who embodies a revolutionary spirit. Lightning in this context is associated with enlightenment or flashes of insight. And Jupiter, the planet, and Jupiter, the deity, are associated with the metal tin, which is bright silver and quite malleable. You can conform it to many different kinds of shapes. The planet Jupiter and the deity and the metal all have a signature that's associated with brightness, enlightenment, and surprisingly, maybe fluidity. The Greeks were very patriarchal, the Romans arguably more so, arguably quite rigid in that. Arguably, the Romans and the Greeks really ruled by force. But we'll see actually that in ancient times, a good leader was meant to be utterly fluid and flexible, and a person who would bear the pains of the many on the shoulders of the one in order to address problems. Jupiter, I was taught, rules the spleen because the spleen is the biggest organ in the body, and Jupiter is so huge in the night sky. But actually, in alchemical medicine, Jupiter is associated typically with the liver, and with processing things, and of course, with how the body sort of purges and cleans its fluids. So, dandelion would be a Jupiterian signature plant that supports the liver in clearing itself out. And I mentioned that sort of discrepancy in what organs are ruled because all throughout alchemy, you're going to see discrepancies. It's good to get used to it and just kind of work with a system or a set of correspondences that seem to make the most sense to you. So I will tend to these days work with Jupiterian plants and their relationship to clearing out the waters of the body, in particular the liver. You'll see that Jupiter's plants grow quickly and tend to be kind of bushy in appearance. You'll see also that many of Jupiter's plants are bitter, which helps the liver do its job. Jupiter, the planet, rules Pisces by night and Sagittarius by day. And so these qualities of expansion and leadership are drawn inward in the Piscean character, where the fluidity of dreams and the fluidity of vision is what rules this character and what makes this Piscean character able to rule. We're going to hang out with Zosimos of Panopolis, who was a ruler and a leader and a scribal priest in ancient Egypt who ruled by vision in a significant way for us. Jupiter also rules Sagittarius, who demonstrates some of these qualities of expansion, action, overthrowing and revolution in a more external way. We'll see Sagittarians having lots of ideals and acting on them in a way that's more extroverted. You'll see the Emperor card at the center of the screen, and we're going to know that we're looking at Jupiter Zeus as Emperor here for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the Emperor's legs are making the glyph for Jupiter. And number two, we've got Jupiter Zeus's totem, which is the eagle here. So Jupiter Zeus is also known for having this kind of far sight of the eagle, being able to see what's happening from a very zoomed out perspective, which requires actually dismantling egoic pursuits. And that's going to be one kind of leg of our work today. I love this image from the Splendor Solis where we have the alchemist kind of in an alchemical jacuzzi, right? Because it helps us put together, oops, I'm so sorry. I'm having mouse issues. It helps us put together calcination and solution as maybe two stages that hold hands with one another. And we have the alchemist sitting here with a bird on their head, indicating that they have this far sight that's required. And we're going to look at the Tao Te Ching a few times, which would have been a text that Chinese alchemists were working with to understand their work, themselves, and the nature of reality. So we have, sorry, I'm just trying to reorganize my screen so I can read to you. Hang on one second. Oh, Lord. Okay, let me give this a go. So we have the Tao Te Ching here. This particular translation is given to us by Jia Fu Fang and Jane English. There are many translations of the Tao Te Ching. Sometimes I'll work with the Ursula Le Guin one. She's a sci-fi and fantasy writer. One of my teachers of Qigong does not like her translation. He feels like she misses some sort of essential philosophical components. I like it because it's quite simple, but I've pulled this one in, which he likes, and let's see what we can make of it. This is where we're trying to get with ourselves as alchemists, as leaders, as people in relationship with ourselves and this world. Under heaven, nothing is more soft and yielding than water. Hang on one second. I'm so sorry. Oh gosh. Okay. Let's try this. Yes. Okay. Okay. Under heaven, nothing is more soft and yielding than water. Yet for attacking the solid and strong, nothing is better. It has no equal. The weak can overcome the strong. The supple can overcome the stiff. Under heaven, everyone knows this, yet no one puts it into practice. Therefore, the sage says, he who takes upon himself the humiliation of the people is fit to rule them. He who takes upon himself the country's disasters deserves to be king of the universe. The truth often seems paradoxical. So this particular line of thinking is our line of thinking for this entire month. That we have to, in order to rule at first the domain of the self, really, um, with grace and with actual power, we have to learn to take on the qualities of water, which is the quality of softness, the quality of yielding, which paradoxically is the quality for attacking things that are solid and strong. I can't speak to the accuracy of this translation as opposed to another, but it strikes me that the word attacking here is of interest, perhaps, to us, because it gets us in the mindset of understanding just how strong softness is. And we see, I'm based in the United States, certainly the opposite of this in much leadership, right? That the attack is not soft, that it's not yielding, that it does not take the humiliations onto itself, that it does not take the disasters onto itself. And we see the results sort of playing out on this grander scale of rigidity, of the rejection of the qualities of softness and yielding and oneness. And we see how destructive it is. Our task for right now, alchemical work starts from within and echoes outwards, is to look for fluidity within and then to apply it outwards in our laboratory work. So this image we've seen already. It's the image of Hermes Trismegistus, who is a combination of the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of utterance, speech, and writing as magic, and the Greek god Hermes, the deity of boundlessness, boundlessness of gender, boundlessness of world, capacity to travel to any place. And between these two things, we have the alchemist in the Western tradition. We have our solar eye, which we want to attend to, which sees what Saturn has shown us, cause and effect, the laws of nature, the seasons, the laws of time. And then we have our lunar eye to attend to, which sees all things as one. Our task for today is not to preference one eye over another, but to think about how by yielding, we can access many different instinctive, intuitive, and knowing capacities. So, one thing to notice in ourselves, if we think of our mind as water, how are we able to best approach our creative work? Is it when the water is flat? Is it when the water is moving, but actually we can get to our work in the space between the waves? Is it when the waves are quite powerful and strong? So we're going to observe our inner waters and their relationship to creativity. We're going to observe the act of yielding as an act of power. And next, we're going to observe what it might mean to think in a way that's not dualistic. This right here is going to help you out with, I think, sounding like an alchemist. So if you sit through a Q&A with a couple of alchemists, they're going to talk to you in riddles, right? They'll answer most questions with yes, no, no, yes. This way and this way. This is alchemical thought that it can balance itself between, certainly there is logic and cause and effect and reality in the present tense, um, in terms of distinguished bodies and distinguishable characteristics. There's also reality in terms of oneness and indistinguishable unity and interdependence. And they don't exist without each other. So this from Cleopatra the Alchemist, who was an Egyptian alchemist active sometime between the 3rd and 4th century CE. And she is best known for a text called the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra. And Chrysopoeia means gold making. But in her time and place, we are not talking about turning lead into gold in terms of the structure of the metal. This was discussed later. In her context, we are talking about how to make the patina of different metals shift or yield to gold quality using different chemicals. Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra is one of the earliest examples of the Ouroboros showing up on an alchemical treatise. We see it in the lower left-hand corner. And written in Greek is en to pan. One is all. And in this text, which has practical laboratory applications and instructions, we have this description, which says, I'm so sorry, I've got to do this again. Okay. One is the serpent which has its poison according to 2 compositions, and one is all, and through it is all, and by it is all, and if you have not all is nothing. So in alchemy, we will have laboratory instructions encoded and encrypted, partly to preserve the tradition and to keep it amongst people who have taken similar ethical vows, which is that our alchemical work has to serve the all. If we're doing our alchemical laboratory work just for ourselves, we're operating only in the solar realm of alchemy, and our work is destructive. We want to be balanced between solar and lunar. And not only will we see our recipes and work encrypted to preserve the kind of ethical structure of alchemy, but we'll also see throughout alchemy these poems and these philosophical riddles. Alchemists, after all, call themselves philosophers, philosophers of fire, philosophers of the stone, rather than any other title which they could give to themselves. So, contemplation of poetry and philosophy is essential for getting the mind into a place where it's nimble, active, and yielding all at once. One is the serpent which has its poison according to 2 compositions. So we'll return to the Emerald Tablet at the end of this talk, but the basic stages of action in that text are that the one mind becomes cognizant, and out of this relationship between the one mind and its awareness, we start to have something called the one thing, which is an energy that is capable of creating form. And this form transmutes endlessly through the movements of the one mind. So we have the one mind creating polarity, and out of this polarity, we have the energetic structure of form. And of course, contemporary science has this in terms of thinking of negative and positive polarity in the structure of form, in the structure of a proton, for example. But for the alchemist, we have to keep returning to the notion that at the end of the day, we're in the situation of a consciousness. And although we might feel ourselves and we might observe things as being separated out from this one mind, that they are in fact not. There's a reason I was about to say a practical reason. Maybe it's not practical in contemporary terms, but there is a reason that we want to return as alchemists to thinking about the one mind as the real condition of reality. And that is, and we'll read passages from the Corpus Hermeticum over the course of the year that sort of strengthen this idea. But if we can tap into this power that is greater than ourselves, that is all things, then we are capable of miracles. If we sit in our separateness, in our individuation as our only condition, we actually can't do much either in the internal laboratory or in the external laboratory. And in order to get into a frame of mind where we can tap into this consciousness, which is the condition for all created life, we have to be yielding. We have to be able to yield our individual self. Someone at a talk I gave last weekend asked, what are some of the dangers of alchemy? What happens if you just dabble in alchemy? Well, it's difficult to dabble in alchemy, as we've all seen, right? It's pretty dense, it's pretty layered. It takes a long time to get into. But one of the things in the stage of solution that we get a little bit of a warning about is over-identification with a self, over-identification with a separate self in particular, also known as vanity. In a Christian context. We want to watch out for that during solution. We want to be able to sort of melt that a little bit. Why is vanity dangerous in terms of alchemy? We can look to contemporary science and see what happens when people turn a scientific breakthrough into a personal egoic achievement. The other thing that we were warned about in calcination, or I wouldn't even say warned, right? We're human, we're flawed. It's wonderful to be flawed, actually. But the other thing to pay attention to in terms of calcination is being rigid in your ideas. The thing to pay attention to in solution is taking things personally that are happening, because actually it's all one thing. The situation of existing is so interdependent on so many factors, limitless numbers of factors, that you can take almost nothing personally. In fact, I would say you can take nothing personally. And yet we work on ourselves. Paradox. So here is another passage from the Tao Te Ching. This is chapter 2, also translated by Jane English and Jia Fufeng. In the class notes, there's a document that has other translations. I encourage folks to sift through, wherever it's available, different translations of these texts so that you can hone in on words and ideas and notions that resonate or harmonize with you in particular. Okay. Under heaven, all can see beauty as beauty only because there is ugliness. All can know good as good only because there is evil. Therefore, having and not having arise together. Difficult and easy complement each other. Long and short contrast with each other. High and low rest upon each other. Voice and sound harmonize each other. Front and back follow one another. So, things to notice in the first part of the passage is under heaven. That's a concept that's all throughout alchemy, that these polarities and these conditions of separateness or duality or dualism are conditions that impact us when we take physical bodies on earth, and that there are facets of our being that are non-physical that experience other conditions of reality. Therefore, the sage goes about doing nothing, teaching no talking. The 10,000 things rise and fall without cease, creating yet not possessing, working yet not taking credit. Work is done, then forgotten. Therefore, it lasts forever. So there's many, many, many things to say about this text. For me, what is striking is in the first two lines, all can know good as good only because there is evil. Therefore, having and not having arise together. Difficult and easy complement each other. This, in my own comprehension, is asking us to loosen our grip on our preferences. I would say not to discard them entirely, but just to loosen our grip, right? Why do we want to loosen our grip on preferences as alchemists? On a practical laboratory level, if you go into an experiment with a very strong preference for how it's supposed to come about and work itself out, you're going to miss what actually happens. The word experiment is indicative of surprise. The word experiment is indicative of some degree of not knowing. So we want to loosen our grip on preference. That said, if we're in a laboratory, it's dangerous doing. We want to have a firm grip on how to go about things. We want to have a firm grip on present reality, but we want to loosen our grip on preference. There are European alchemists, I think, maybe were envious of Chinese and Indian alchemists because they came up with a two-path modality, like those alchemists have for very different reasons. In European alchemy, they have the wet path, which is the path of working with plants, and the dry path, which is the path of working with minerals and metals. In Indian alchemy, we'll have the left hand and the right hand path, which indicate very different things in terms of spiritual practice that we won't go into today. But the wet path is working with plants. This is predominantly where I hang out personally as an alchemist. And in the wet path, there are very strong recipes for doing things. We're going to do a recipe next month. How you make an alchemical tincture, pretty standard, right? However, every single time you make one, it'll come out different. And you want that. We do not want the age of mechanical reproduction in alchemy. And you can imagine why. We want to be able to connect with the soul of things, which is refreshed anew every time we approach our alchemical work. Some facets of how we might work with loosening our grip on preferences can be in how we relate to ourselves. When we look at clinging to needing to be one particular way or another in our internal space, and we bring in the image of water, we bring in the image of softness, it can be such a relief. I'm 44, and every time I open up the internet, they know this about me, and so they show me advertisements for Botox and wrinkle cream. And this, of course, leads to a mind that does not want to age, that strongly prefers, I don't mean feeling youthful, which is absolutely, I think, part of being fluid in a way, but looking youthful. And it's a privilege to age, and wrinkles are lovely and wonderful. And applying the idea of yielding and softness to a preference for looking youthful as opposed to old is refreshing and wonderful and actually, in a way, revolutionary. So that's a personal example, and you all will have your own. The second part of this is really useful, I think, too. Therefore, the sage goes about doing nothing, teaching no talking. So the sage, the wise person, does nothing and teaches no talking. Wow. Wow. That actually, in the stillness of the sage, we discover their true depth. And this, of course, applies to each one of us, right? The 10,000 things rise and fall without cease, creating, yet not possessing. So the one mind, in collaboration with the one thing, creates and creates and creates and creates and creates and does not possess. Things that take material form decay. Working yet not taking credit. Work is done, then forgotten. Therefore, it lasts forever. You'll see this being practiced in a literal way by alchemists, that the artists who illustrate the manuscripts are very rarely credited. And if they are, generally speaking, it's not by any name that you could trace to a person. The reasons for this are manifold. One is that it was dangerous to practice alchemy. Both literally, you could blow up your laboratory, but also it kept getting outlawed. So it was dangerous to be public as an alchemist. It was dangerous to share recipes with people who didn't understand how to implement them correctly. But more than that, in alchemy, we yield to the notion that we are just facets of the one mind and the one thing interrelating with one another. And in yielding to that, we create something that's long lasting. Alchemy has been discredited, debunked, outlawed, thrown to the side. Much of its material has been burned. We're left with fragments of its history. And yet, here we are in 2026, really drinking of its wisdom, taking it in and making it new. So, this last bit I think is useful also for those of us that work in the arts, where, at least in the art schools I attended, you had to develop a signature style where people would look and say, ah, that's an Andy Warhol. Right? Or oh, that's a Van Gogh. You create an identity and a brand, and this is how you succeed. And the idea is to make that brand so strong that you can accumulate a bunch of wealth and power. For some of us, there's discomfort in that idea. There's a lack of creativity in that idea. That idea implies that we might have to do the same thing over and over and over and over. That idea might imply that it's difficult to evolve because you've put a really tight constraint on your creativity, among other things. So, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, I think, is a cornerstone of alchemy, really. I think it's the bedrock that we stand on. I would encourage returning to it. So we're going to focus a little bit on Zosimos of Panopolis, who was a Greco-Egyptian alchemist and Gnostic mystic. So he's interesting because Zosimos was an Egyptian temple priest, we're pretty sure. And he corresponded with an alchemist called Theosebia. and she was a Gnostic Christian. And we see them both depicted in this Islamic manuscript. There is, or Arabic manuscript, more accurately, there is Zosimos with the sun on his head, and there is Theosibia with the moon on her head, and they are dialoguing back and forth. And if you look at Zosimos's texts, they are a really compelling visually mashup between Christian deities and Egyptian deities and some philosophical constructs that were going on in Gnosticism. Zosimos lived between the 3rd and 4th century in Greek occupied Egypt or Greco-Egyptian terrains. And he published books on alchemy, and he was not supposed to. And so I love him because he really inspired me to teach alchemy publicly when the schools that I belong to, you're not supposed to. My teachers are not public facing. They don't accept students, they pick them out. They don't have websites, they don't advertise. You're not supposed to. When you learn with them, you do the work quietly as a community. You don't extrovert it. These are similar to vows that Zosimos took. We'll see kind of what his context was in a second. And he decided that he would publish works on alchemy. Of course, they're encrypted, so really other alchemists were the audience for them. But he decided that actually this information would evolve better if it came out of the temples where he worked and moved into the wider circle of alchemists that were practicing in Greco-Egyptian terrain at that time. So Zosimos was an Egyptian temple priest whose job it was to create metal statuary that was temple made, so built to house the deity that it represented. And there are very specific instructions for this. And so part of Zosimos's job was as a scribal priest to read these recipes and to replicate them. And so he would read out the recipes to the artisans. But the other part of his job as a scribal priest was to make sure that the metal statuary was made ritually, and to make sure that as he innovated in terms of how we can work with metals and making metal statuary, that even these innovations in the laboratory were done ritually. And so this is the person who, if the idea of making art that is like a birdhouse for the divine to fly into is of interest to you, I would look to Zosimos. And there's a great book called Becoming Gold about Zosimos, written by Shannon Grimes. It's on the course bibliography, that goes through his context, his teachings, how he practiced. And then from there, you can extrapolate how you might use his methodologies. And we're going to look at some of his writing and see a big piece of his methodology. But when you make metal statues in the Egyptian temple context, as you prepare the metals and the molds, you do certain rituals and you say certain prayers, and you meld your mind with the metals as the temple priest, so that as the metals are coming into form and into shape, they are harmonizing, they are readjusting themselves so that they can welcome in the divine. The other piece of creating statuary that houses the divine is that once the statue is formed and made, you do a ritual called the opening of the mouth, which is where you cast your metals, and then once it's done, you've got your figure and it's been gilded and patinaed and painted and bejeweled and whatever else it is you're doing. You apologize to the statue for all of the horrors it endured in its making, and you promise that no further harm will come to the statue. And in this way, after this final ritual, the deity who's represented will consent to come into the form. And for Zosimos, he said that statues that don't undergo this process cannot know themselves and therefore cannot be known. Um, Learning to make art like an alchemist requires that we actually surrender the notion that we are the authors of anything. And if you want to make work in this way, a few of you have brought up the icon tradition, which comes out of this tradition of uh, making temple work in Egypt and other places. You really are making work in a devotional capacity. You really are making work in a capacity that's yielding, and you really are making work that has an acute sensitivity to the materials that are collaborating with you. So in alchemy, not only, for example, in terms of making metal statuary, not only are you sort of creating a vehicle for the deity to come into, but also the materials that make the shape have sentience. The materials that gild the outer statue, the outer shell, have sentience. The jewels have sentience. The place where you put the statue has a sentience. So you are entirely collaborative. So not only do you yield something of your own individuality here, but actually you yield to all these other intelligences that inform and create the work. We can see, of course, that there are practical considerations to that. As an alchemist, you will be acutely aware with your senses of humidity levels, seasons, light levels. That will change your alchemical experiment drastically. You will be aware of astrology. The organizations of the celestial spheres will change your outcome drastically. The way that your inner waters are behaving will change the outcome drastically. Um, so conditions are collaborative in the alchemical imagination. And personally, I find that to be a relief. The other thing to say in studying Zosimos's practices is that it's useful to remember how long alchemical works take. So if we are melting metals and patinaing metals, one of these statues could take months. And Zosimos, as the temple priest, would have been there the whole time. Nothing is fast. If you're an alchemist who's distilling alcohol, you can't walk away from distilling alcohol. One fluctuation in temperature, and because alcohol is combustible, you have an explosion. You sit with your experiments and you yield to them. You yield to the great work. Okay. So Visions of Zosimos is a text that is, I think, a cornerstone yet again of understanding alchemy. And there's a translation of Visions of Zosimos available online. I haven't seen too many translations into English of Zosimos's writings, so I don't know how to compare this one to others in terms of the accuracy of the translation. This is the one that we can all get to online. Visions of Zosimos describes a crucial component of Zosimos's practice, and indeed all alchemical practices. And this is that you use trance work to get into the mind of your materials, to get into the minds of celestial bodies, to get into places where your physical body can't go. So we don't have telescopes or microscopes that are going to help us understand the structure of, in this case, copper. So as alchemists, we go into the mind of copper and we use meditative states, sleep states, and trance states. And those of us who work with meditation or trance states, in any of its varieties, we know that what we have to hold in order to do that work is a sort of soft mind that can receive what information is coming in, but not too soft that you fall all the way asleep and maybe aren't participating in what's happening, but also not so active or rigid that you are trying to control what's happening and therefore sort of missing the information. We have to hold ourselves in trance work in this really in-between state. Those of you who are interested in Carl Jung's analysis of alchemy would also do well to study Zosimos. Apparently, Carl Jung read visions of Zosimos around 1910, 1915, and it completely informed how he created his version of psychoanalysis. And you'll see why for those of you who are familiar with his work. So in this text, we have Zosimos doing a type of trance work where first he says a prayer, then he falls into a trance or falls asleep. Then he talks to the metal copper and he's trying to get copper to, we find out later, yield its lead components. He's trying to make a copper alloy purified. And so he's going into the mind of the copper and he's subjecting copper mentally to different types of chemical water, as he calls them, to see what happens. And you'll see here an extreme sensitivity to what our materials undergo when we do creative work. So, visions of Zosimos. The first vision, the composition of the waters, the dance, the growth, the flowering and decay of the corporeal, the separation and the conjunction of spirit and body. These are not the result of discrete natures, but of a single nature acting upon itself, a uniform quality, such as the solidity of metals or the moisture of plants. Within this single system of many colors, the quest, shimmering and myriad, is preserved. In accord with time's measured rhythm, it synchronizes with the waxing and waning of the moon as nature flows through itself in cycles of contraction and expansion. So this is the prayer that Zosimos says before doing the trance work. And we could spend a few days just with that opening passage, thinking about duality and oneness, right? He dances through these same concepts. After I uttered these words, I fell into a trance and saw before me a sacrificial hierophant perched atop a broad, bowl-shaped altar. A ladder of 15 steps climbed to its top. The hierophant arose, and a voice from above addressed me. I have accomplished the descent of the 15 steps of night, and have ascended the 15 steps of illumination. The one who sacrifices me also revives me through casting aside the heavy sediment of the body. And since by the will of necessity I am an initiated hierophant, I become spirit. I listened to the words of the one atop the bowl-shaped altar, then asked him who he was. He answered me in a quavering voice, I am Ion, Hierophant of the innermost sanctuary, and I have endured unbearable violence. At dawn, I was overtaken and dismembered by one wielding a sword. He chopped me apart according to the strictures of harmony. He gripped his blade, scalped me, and gathered together my bones and flesh. Then he burned them in the numinous fire until I learned to become spirit through transformation of the body. I compelled him, and after he spoke these words, his eyes turned blood red, and he vomited up all of his flesh. I saw him as a deformed, tiny homunculus, gnashing at himself with his own teeth while he disintegrated. I awoke in terror and wondered if this was the composition of the waters. I thought I had understood it well and fell back into a trance. So far, all we know is that there is some kind of a priest who's trying to yield their spirit, and someone has chopped them up and burned them, and it was unbearably painful. And this metal is disintegrating, or this priest, this spirit, we don't know it's a metal yet, maybe, is disintegrating and falling apart. Zosimos then asks himself if he understood the vision correctly. He comes out of trance and then he goes back in. I saw the same bowl-shaped altar filled with boiling water. There were many people, infinite in number, within it, but there was no one outside of the altar that I could question. I moved in closer for a better look at this sight and noticed an aged homunculus barber who questioned me about what I saw. I said that I was astounded by the boiling water and the people in it who were cooking yet still alive. He answered, "This is where the act of preservation takes place. Those who hope to master the art arrive here and, through shedding the body, become spirit." So I said, "Are you a spirit?" And he answered, "A spirit and a guardian of spirits." As we spoke, the water continued to boil and the people screamed. I saw a man made of copper who held a lead tablet in his hand. He stared at the tablet and proclaimed, "I command all those who suffer to be calm, to take up a tablet and write with their own hand. Turn your face to the sky and keep your mouth open till your uvula is swollen." The act followed the word, and the Lord of the house said to me, "You have seen. Craning your neck upwards, you have seen what is accomplished. This man of copper is the sacrificial hierophant and the sacred offering. It is he who vomited his own flesh. The power over this water and those who suffer was given to him." After experiencing this vision, I awoke again and asked myself how to interpret this. Is this the white and yellow water, boiling and divine? I found that I understood it correctly, and I said that it was beautiful to speak and lovely to hear, beautiful to give and to receive, lovely to be rich and to be poor. How does nature learn to give and to receive? The man of copper gives, and the water stone receives. Metals give, and plants receive. The stars give, and flowers receive. The sky gives, and the earth receives. Thunder yields flashing fire. All things are interwoven and unravel. All things mingle and fuse. All things mingle and disperse. All things moisten and dry. All things flower and bloom in the bowl-shaped altar. So as you get acclimated to reading alchemical texts, you'll start to be able to decrypt a little bit of what's happening here, right? So we know that copper is trying to yield lead. We know that Zosimos is working with different types of sulfuric acids because of the color of the waters he's describing. We know what temperature of boiling we want. We actually want the temperature to be so high that the mixture is whistling, it's screaming. We know that before beginning, you'll want to cut your copper up into small pieces, right? So as you get accustomed to looking at alchemical texts, and of course, as you pursue recipes that are of interest, you'll learn to sort of see what he's describing on a laboratory level or in terms of laboratory constructs. These are instructions. But for those of us that are maybe not metal workers or are as yet unfamiliar with how to read laboratory instructions, or maybe that's not how we're going to use alchemy, this text is really useful in helping us figure out how to get into our creative mindset, which is the trance state. This is one of the preliminary states for the alchemist. And as we go through the year, we're actually going to learn different kind of shape-shifting and consciousness projecting activities. But each class ends with the visualization because this is a primary tool of the alchemist that before you touch anything in your material laboratory, you go within and you talk to it. So if we were going to do our green lion drawings again, applying this particular strategy, we would look at the image of the green lion that we were going to copy. We would say a prayer to it, honoring it. You might borrow the prayer that Zosimos used, talking about how nature works. And then you would go within and you would meet the green lion eating the sun and talk to it and become familiar with the shapes and colors and textures and watch them animate in the internal space. And you might want to copy Zosimos in that you come in and out of that dynamic, in and out of that dynamic, refining and refining the image. We will return to that green lion image and work it a couple more times over, applying different strategies that we're learning along the way. But Zosimos gives us a really clear imprint for that. He also gives us a really clear understanding for how we might feel things. A lot of people who are drawn to alchemy have deep feeling, deep sensitivity. I would imagine that everyone in this group would identify with that. We have the capacity to stand in front of a tree and feel it, really feel it. This is a temperament that's suitable for this work. I'm going to show you some images of solution from the Western tradition. We'll look at some contemporary strategies and then I'll pop out of this slideshow. I know it's kind of dense. So these are two different images that come from the same text called the Book of Lamb Spring. And here we see an image that we might associate with Pisces, right? The soul and the spirit swimming in the sea. We'll get into the composition of soul, spirit, and body next month. But we see for the time being polarities, qualities of positive and negative, projection and reception, warm and cool, etc., being the same. So if you see this in a European text, they're talking about solution and they're talking more so about the philosophical properties of solution, about how the waters and the dissolving of the hard by the soft, how that affects us as thinkers. This is another image of solution that is talking to us about, with our solar eye, perceiving polarity, and with our lunar eye, yielding our preferences within polarities, yielding, seeing polarities as separate, using our lunar eye to see polarities as being of one. So here we have the king and the queen intertwining in a vessel, and at the top is a pine cone, which is the Western equivalent to the lotus, the image of enlightenment. This work is a sound work, and it's linked in our class notes if you want to hear it. Dreams, created by Delia Derbyshire and Barry Bermange for the BBC, is an incredible text where they interview, I don't know how many people about their dreams, and then they organize the interviews into themes that were common: running, land, falling, color, and sea. And then they sort of intermingle all of the dream scenes and dream themes with electronic music. Delia Derbyshire was an early pioneer in electronic music. So part of working with solution in the alchemical imagination in this particular course is learning to work with the dream state in a way that's focused but yielding, intentional but fluid, alert but also able to let go. The other person that I wanted to bring to us for a solution is an artist called Bastian Eder, who worked with water in a way that I think is useful for us. Um, a lot of his work is video, it's conceptual, and video and sound do not play well on Zoom, unfortunately. But I've brought in some stills and I can describe some of his practices. On the left, we have Fall to Amsterdam, and this is a video of Bastian cycling into a canal. And there's lots you could say about it, right? But for our purposes, in terms of thinking about alchemy, this is dissolving the sort of concrete action of body, bicycle, and road in the river, sort of loosening that of its meaning. And then in the background, we have the physical bridge with its reflection making a circle. So the one mind becoming aware of itself and creating out of this awareness a concrete form, and yet it's all one thing. On the right, we have just a GIF from an image that Bastian, or a video, sorry, that Bastian made called I'm Too Sad to Tell You. And it's a video still of him weeping. And they say actually in certain alchemical texts that weeping is a preliminary stage of enlightenment, that as you're getting closer towards it, you begin to weep, and that this is a physical signal of the surrender required. And this is a postcard that Bastian released in addition to his film work called I'm Too Sad to Tell You. The sea, the land, the artist has observed their change and stood with great sadness to know they will be no more. So, of course, with weeping, we can weep for any number of reasons. One of them could be grief. One of them could be the recognition of impermanence and the loss associated with it. And so Bastian, in much of his work, is talking about dissolving into the whole and the grief that attends it. And in his last project, titled In Search of the Miraculous, which is the title of a P.D. Ouspensky book, where he describes his relationship with the Armenian mystic Gurdjieff, Bastian took this title and applied it to a project where he got inside of a little tiny boat and decided to sail from Massachusetts back to Holland. And this was going to be his last project, and he intended to stop being an artist after this. And Bastian was never seen or heard from again. Likely he was lost at sea. His boat was found tipped on its side some months after he departed. Some people, as they will do with beloved figures, speculate that he was picked up by another boat so that he could disappear, so that he could relinquish his identity. We don't know. But Basyan sailed out and with it was intending, however it transpired, to release his identity as an artist. Of course, as alchemists, we will all release the body at some point. But before that happens, we want to be able to experiment with releasing our individual self. And it can be useful to think about situations where that happens for you. There's so many joyful ones that I can think of. Bastian is a bit mournful in his approach, but there are ecstatic situations where we release the singular self. Those of us that have been to a rave maybe have experienced this, just dancing until there's a oneness that becomes apparent. Some of us experience this while walking through a forest, that we experience a moment or two where actually we're just one facet of the consciousness of forest. Some of us during meditative practice, my assertion has been that human beings experience the ecstatic state, generally speaking, in these tiny little blips. So, for example, in 1 minute of time, you'll have several microseconds that are ecstatic. And that with these practices, we can learn to expand that ecstatic state out a little bit so we can sit in it for longer and longer and longer. And what happens when you reach an ecstatic state or a state that transcends individualism, or what can happen, or one thing that can happen, is that you experience a real relief that the scope of your being is wider and vaster and more interconnected than you had previously understood. And this can provide a profound relief, which can also lead to tears, right? Just crying out of relief. Ah, here we all are. So I'll come out of sharing. There's a question from Cecilia. The word yielding. Would you like some synonyms for that? Yielding meaning something that gives away, or we could think of the quality of water in that it will take the shape of what it's in, but it will also erode the shape of what it's in eventually. I would say my best definition for yielding is something that gives way, but if other folks have definitions, please throw them in the chat. And let me know, Cecilia, if that doesn't, feel free to unmute yourself if that doesn't answer what you're asking. Kira, could you talk more about separateness, how sitting in our separateness can mess with us and how yielding helps? Well, I can talk about it on a personal level and then I'll open it up to the group because I bet we all have experiences that mess with us. I'll return to the example that I gave of being in art school because that's actually a big reason why I decided to go public with alchemy, although it was discouraged, continues to be discouraged. Um, When I was in art school, I was a painter and I was encouraged to paint the same way. And this is the Eliza Swan style of painting. And I was encouraged to have a reason, a logical reason for why I painted that way, and a sort of an academic discourse to explain the subject matter. And this to me is not art. This created profound crisis because I wanted what my work did and was about to be able to change as often as it wanted to. And because I'd had training in alchemy, I just couldn't see the work being made by me as an individual. It just made no sense. Um, so I found that being siphoned into a sort of brand identity as an artist was messing with my confidence because it was too narrow and because it didn't allow me to sort of interdepend on conditions. Many of us who engage with, let's say, we have our own businesses or we have our own work that we're trying to promote or do out there will experience this, right? Contemporary technology encourages us to become a brand, which is awful. That would be an example. But if other folks have examples or things they want to say about that, I would love to hear. Feel free to unmute. David sees yielding as commanding the selfness to step aside from the activity it normally holds as its domain. Yeah, it's a great way to say it. Yeah. I didn't realize how long I was talking for. Apologies. I try to keep the slideshow down to 45 minutes and it just never works. I'm like an old jalopy. I don't get going until half an hour in. Any other questions or comments? Or are we feeling like it's good to take a rest, a break? Okay, let us take a break. Oh, Uma, seems like yielding required for trance. Yep, yeah, for sure it is. Yeah. And yet, staying alert, which requires knowledge of the body, which we practice at the end of every session too. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 35 after the hour, at which point I'll introduce the exercise for this particular session, and then we'll do a 10-minute visualization. I'll see you all then. Hi, everybody. I got so lost reading the chat that I forgot to jump back in. Gosh, your conversations are so beautiful and so just lovely and intimate. And yeah, I wonder, some of these processes can be quite intense. And my idea was to run this as prescribed. Once a month we'll meet, but maybe a couple of times we'll have like an open meeting for folks to drop in and we can just chat about what's going on. Have conversations that are a little multi-directional instead of this one where I'm just talking. I'll see where I can work that in. Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. We'll do that then. Yeah, because it occurs to me there's just not enough um, time to hear from you all. Yeah, super great encouragement from Salita. And that puts me in mind of something that may also be useful to mention in the context of the inner laboratory work, which is that as we sort of build our vocabulary, we want to think about all these elements in conversation. So, for example, some of us might relate to this, but there can be a yielding that's too far or not appropriate for a certain situation, or might cause a type of disappearance that isn't helpful for whatever reason. My own example about that would be a kid. As a kid, I used that camouflage strategy, right? You become one with the wallpaper, and this is how you kind of get through difficult dynamics. And then that led to really having trouble with asserting myself later. And so, there can be times when like yielding the self isn't appropriate or isn't the strategy, or maybe it's lacking the heat of calcination that allows for you to kind of, stand up and fight when required. Same with calcination, that sort of heat and energy of life and desire is so beautiful and so wonderful to drum up. And then sometimes it's explosive in a way that's not so useful. So we think about these things in proportion. We will spend a lot of time next month with Paracelsus, um, who says that anything is a poison or an antidote depending on the proportion. That really what we want to think about here is proportion. Okay. I was going to lead us into our next visualization, but before I do that, wow, gosh, there's so many gorgeous conversations happening. Bye, Zoe. Um, okay, I want to show you this month's assignment, in case there are questions about it. So for this month, the prompt is to look at the first couple passages of the Emerald Tablet and to diagram them. So there's an example from Robert Flood on the right. He actually didn't draw these, an anonymous illustrator did based on his writings. But this could be a way to depict the one mind creating the conditions for material reality that lead to the one thing. There's a link to some more Robert Flood illustrations that may or may not be helpful, but for this month, the prompt is not to copy them directly, although certainly take what you like from them and leave the rest. The idea is to try to just draw out or diagram out or doodle out the movement from the one mind to the one thing so that it makes sense to you in terms of flow or movement or polarity or relationship. There's no right or wrong here. It's really just a deepening of understanding through diagramming, which is a big thing in alchemy. And we'll return to our lions a bit later on. Does anyone have questions about this prompt, which is up in our classroom now too?
I have a little question.
Yeah.
When do we think about the materials we use when we are drawing? So it's like when I was reading, I was like, oh, so this is very watercolor, ink, kind of very fluid materials.
Yeah,
That would be part of the work itself, right?
yeah,
I
it's
was
such,
thinking of using the bath water as the
yeah, yeah,
It's just like I love continuing the thread from the imagination and the experience into the work itself. So thinking kind of in that way.
yeah, that's a great thing to think about. Um, And it's, yeah, I love it. Amazing. Yeah, use the bath water, use watercolors if that occurs to you. If for the time being, pen to paper is what you want to do just to experience the movement between the hand and the mind, and that way it's all open. Um, but yeah, thinking about your materials is a huge piece and such a lovely thought there. Cool.
Eliza, can I ask a question?
Yeah, hey.
Hey, just when you mentioned diagram,
Mhm.
I'm just wondering what that means rather than make a drawing. So is there like a special kind of meaning connected with diagram?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I use the word diagram just to sort of loosen it up from it having to be an artwork. It's really just sort of a thinking through moving the implement exercise. But if you look at the Robert Fulla diagrams, it might sort of open up a way to approach it. He has a text where he describes the origins of the cosmos, and then whoever made the plates for it was just so ingenious, right? So it's like clouds of black and clouds of white and flames erupting. And so it's a way to try to see kind of how your body moves the notion of one mind to one thing on paper without using words. So maybe diagram feels like, oh God, I have to have like a chart, but it's just a word that hopefully takes it a little bit away from it's got to be like a good looking piece of art. Um,
Okay, that's interesting because it was just diagram in my mind was kind of like for some reason I kind of go to like a scientific more kind of
yeah,
recipe
yeah,
type thing. It's like so it's got to have straight lines and numbers
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's got to kind of mean something like that. That's just what occurs to me. I'm not saying
yeah,
that the same for others, but that's what I was
yeah,
thinking, and I was just trying to kind of grapple with how do I do like how that's not the way I work at all normally. So how do I yield to that?
yeah. Just swap the language out, which we have to do in this class a
Yeah,
lot.
thanks.
Um, just so that it works for you and it helps you feel free. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show you one thing and then we'll move into our trance states, which is that at a certain point, you may have your eyes closed, so I'll just show you it now while they're open. Um, I'm going to prompt you to breathe with hand movements. So you will inhale and lift the hands up, and then you'll exhale and push them down. Inhaling, lifting the hands up, exhaling, pushing them down. This comes out of Qigong, a Taoist mind, body, spirit practice. That's it, but just showing you so that you could, when it's prompted during the visualization, you know what it is. So let's get into our trance positions, whatever they might be. Eyes closed, preferably, but if closed isn't right, the recommendation would be to crack them open maybe 3 feet in front of you and just let the gaze be soft. Blinking is wonderful, blinking is permitted. Otherwise, soften the eyelids closed. And we'll start by observing our breath as it is. Checking it out. And this presents maybe an immediate awareness that as soon as we observe something, it changes. And that's okay. Observe your awareness changing your breath. And as your awareness begins to soften and the breath begins to soften, you might gently guide the breath to move up towards the head on an inhale and down towards the feet on the exhale. Moving the breath up towards the head on the inhale and down towards the feet on the exhale, just doing that for a few rounds. Letting the breath move like the water does on earth, where it evaporates upwards and rains downwards. And letting that go. We will instantly, spontaneously, and without effort, conjure up our philosopher's stone, allowing it to emerge. Noticing as the stone emerges, its shapes and colors, its appearance for today. Noticing the size of the stone, maybe compared to your hand, how large it is. Noticing the weight of the stone, how heavy it is. Noticing the surface of the stone. Is it hot, cool, wet, dry, rough, smooth? Breathing in and taking in the fragrances or flavors emitting from the stone. Breathing in and taking in the sounds emitting from the stone. Taking a step back and noticing the stone in its fullness, knowing and noticing how you feel. Knowing and noticing where the stone sits. You will spontaneously and with no effort allow water to pool beneath the stone. Allow the waters to rise up above the stone so that it's submerged. You can adjust the temperature of the waters. You can adjust the color of the waters. You can adjust the movement of the waters. Maybe for now, it's good to have the waters be still and observe how the stone is changing within them. Maybe it's good to stir them or agitate them. You decide. Next, we'll play with moving the waters up and down within ourselves, rinsing our inner landscape along with the Philosopher's Stone. You can start with putting the palms face down, the hands out just in front of the lower ribs, palms face down. And as you breathe in, you lift the hands up in concert with the inhale. And as you lift the hands in the inhale up, you lift up the waters within. And then exhale, pressing the palms down towards the earth, breathing out, bringing the level of the water all the way down. Exhaling out, breathing in, lifting the palms of the hands, raising the waters to all the way up at the top of the head. Breathing out and pressing the waters down, exhaling, releasing the waters down through the feet. 5 more rounds in your own time, breathing in, lifting the hands, raising the waters up to the crown of the head. Breathing out, pushing the waters down through the soles of the feet. A few more rounds like this. Breathing in, the hands float up. Last one, pushing the waters all the way down on an inhale, letting them run out through the soles of the feet and away, releasing the waters from the inner landscape. Feeling a difference in your inner world, having pulled the waters up and down, and focusing in on the Philosopher's Stone, noticing how its shape may have yielded to a different one, having gone through solution, noticing the shape and color of the stone. Noticing the scale of the stone, maybe compared to your own hand. Noticing the weight of the stone as it becomes heavier or lighter. Taking an inhale, noticing the flavors and fragrances associated with the stone. Have they changed? Noticing the surface of the stone. Is it drier, wetter, hotter, cooler, rougher, smoother? Taking a step back and observing the stone as a whole, noticing how you feel. Preparing to come out of the trance work, putting the stone away. Taking a deep breath in and touching the palms of the hands overhead, rubbing them together to generate some heat. Pressing the warm palms over the eyes. Coming back to the shared space, or not, taking what time you need. Maybe you want to jot down a note. For those of you who feel like you wish to, or you can, I'd love to hear how your stone reacted to solution.
I'm happy to share.
Great.
For me, like, um, it it softened, but like originally the stone came with these little edges and spikes,
Yeah.
and it was very dry. And I don't know if it was my conscious mind that knowing it was in the water, but it felt like the spikes almost became like these organic tentacles that just kind of softened, but they didn't disappear. They just kept
Yeah.
going back and forth between soft and rigid. So
Wow. Beautiful.
it felt, it was like very red and rich in color. So it felt like it was very like in my heart, like a
Yeah.
ruby of sorts. So it felt like my heart in a way had these spikes that kept letting things in and out. They were like the little guardians of it, or like the little gatekeepers.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, my stone was very spiky.
Yeah. Beautiful. I had a parallel image of a ruby that was a stone, but then when I would fix my gaze on it, it would melt like a fountain. And if I looked away, it would become a stone again. That was also very red.
Mm.
Rose had
And
a
I felt teary when you were talking about like when I was coming out of the meditation, it felt like I felt very like soft and teary. So it
Mm,
like a, kind of what you were talking about, the mournful artist,
mhm.
Bastian, like the way the weeping, it kind of came to me. Maybe because you talked about it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, yeah. Rose had a waxy coating that came off as the water warmed. Beautiful. Paula, my stone started as a clear quartz looking stone that emitted rainbows. It was in the shape of a diamond. After solution, it melted down and became a whole new crystal, milky and almost hollow and flattened. Wow, beautiful.
My philosopher's stone, when we last met, became like the planet Earth. And
Mm,
today it remains the planet Earth, but larger and in a different spot. And when I brought in the waters of the earth joined with the waters,
hmm
leaving sort of the jagged chunks of earth and red too, like what was revealed beneath is like this core of sort of a rust red.
Mm. There are all those, I'm sure you've seen them probably, all those alchemical diagrams of the Philosopher's Stone being at the center of the earth, and that actually
Oh,
that's
yeah.
where we go with our consciousness to get it in certain traditions. Yeah, yeah. So cool. Casey, mine was a jagged raw piece of gold like a gold miner might have found in the 1850s. It became shiny and luminous after solution and smelled like rain. Wow, gorgeous. Selena started as a faceted blue and green gem and then turned into red soft shape that had a jelly consistency and a heartbeat. My gosh. And David is noticing all of Beth's rainbows, which are so beautiful.
Oh, yeah, we're in the sweet spot. There's just like one part of the day when this happens. Now is the time.
Glad we caught it.
Yeah.
So cool, everybody.
My stone today was like this big of an orb dripping in perpetual mud, just nonstop mud with an eye in it on it in one spot, just like
Mm.
mud everywhere. And maybe it was my eye. And then the solution washed it off to be like this same shape, but like a pearl opalescent kind of with a little bit of oil on the surface, lavendery and
Mm.
florally. But and the eye turned blue, but then could go anywhere
Mm.
on the orb at any time. And then I swallowed it.
Wow. This is amazing. This is such great art that we're all making. Oh, wow. Patrick, oopsie. A large, oops, I lost the chat. Oh my God. There we go. A large egg-shaped stone, dark and luminous like an opal labradorite. When submerged in water, the boundaries went transparent and just the luminous shimmer remained. And the cool boil bubbles said, "Get more alive." And the stone reemerged and now sits upon a lotus, salty and magnolia in scent. My God! It's a finished artwork right there, too. How gorge. Daisy, my stone was a teardrop-shaped opal, bit bigger than my palm, heavy and smooth and multifaceted, changing colors. I was surprised that it didn't change much after solution. It became warmer and more luminous, and I could see deeper into its center, but many of its characteristics stayed the same. Wow. Oh my gosh, and we have Corinne and Daisy also eating their stones, which I love this. Wow, everyone. Wow. Okay. Once again, I've taken us way out of the bounds of time. What can I do?
Jupiter.
Sorry about that. Yeah, let's wrap up here. I'm feeling nice and dreamy and spacey and solution-y. I don't know about you all. Queen of Chronos, working on it. Um, so much to share and to think about and to do. So keep it up in the group chat if you're into it in the Google Classroom. It's been so cool to see you all kind of chatting and sharing. And if that feels overwhelming, you can turn off notifications and just visit it when you have time. I've been going in there once or twice a month just to check out what everybody's up to, and it's so exciting. This could also generate into groups kind of starting to form where you all can meet and kind of work on ideas together. And thank you all so much for everything you contribute. It's massively amazing, interesting, cool to work together. Okay, I need more coffee, I think. Thanks for being here, Patrick. Thanks for tripping. I'll see y'all next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao, thank you.